and welcome for the next part of the chapter, Differing Strands with the Movement. The movement in the towns is the second topic of the chapter. The movement started with the middle class participation in the cities. Thousands of students left government-controlled schools and colleges. Headmasters and teachers resigned, and lawyers gave up their legal practices. But one question arises here, and that is, why were elections not boycotted in Madras in 1920? In most provinces except Madras, the council elections were boycotted. It was because the Justice Party was the party of the non-Brahmins, and they felt that entering the council was one way of gaining power and could win over Brahmins. The efforts of the non-cooperation on the economic front were dramatic. So here another question arises. What was the economic effects of non-cooperation movement? Foreign goods were boycotted, liquor shops picketed, and foreign clothes was burnt in huge bonfires, due to which the import of foreign clothes became halved between 1921 and 22. Its value dropped from 102 crore rupees to 57 crore rupees. In many places, merchants and traders refused to trade in foreign goods or finance foreign trade. As the boycott movement spread and people began discarding imported clothes and wore only Indian made products, so production of Indian textile mills and handlooms went up. But this movement in the cities gradually slowed down for a variety of reasons. Here arises another question as to why the non-cooperation movement gradually slowed down in the cities. One of the reasons for the slowdown of the movement was the khadi cloth. It was expensive then. Most produced mill cloth and poor people could not afford to buy it. So it was difficult for the mass population to buy it. Similarly, the boycott of British institution posed a problem as there was no alternative Indian institution set up so that could be used in place of the British institutions. So students and teachers began to move back to government schools, and lawyers joined back to the work in the British-run schools and courts. Rebellion in the countryside. This is our next subtopic. The non-cooperation movement spread in the countryside or villages too. The struggles of the peasants and tribals, which were developing in different parts of India in the years after the war, drew into its fold. In Awadh, the peasants' movement was led by Baba Ramchandra, a sannyasi who had earlier been to Fiji as a contractual laborer. But the question which arises here is, why the peasant movement started? What was their demand? In Awadh, the movement was against talukdars and landlords. They demanded high rents and a variety of other taxes from peasants. Now the peasants had to do beggar work without being paid, and also had to work at landlords' farms without any payment. As tenants, they had no security of how long they can cultivate or own a plot of land. The peasants were regularly expelled from their area of cultivation, so that they could not have rights over the leased land. The peasant movement demanded reduction of revenue, abolition of beggar, and social boycott of the oppressive landlords. In many places, Nai Dhobi, that is the barber and the washerman bands, were also organized by panchayats to deprive landlords of the services of even barbers and washermen. In June 1920, Jawaharlal Nehru began to move around the villages in Awadh, talking to the villagers and trying to understand their grievances. Describe the role of Jawaharlal Nehru in assembling the peasants of Awadh is our next question that arises here. By October-June 1920, Mr. Nehru established the Awadh Kisan Sabha and was set up headed by Jawaharlal Nehru, Baba Ramchandra and a few others. Within a movement, over 300 branches had been set up in the villages around the regions. So when the non-cooperation movement began, the Congress included the Awadh peasant struggles with the movement. The development in the peasant movement made the Congress leaders unhappy. As the movement spread in 1921, the houses of talukdars and merchants were attacked, bazaars were looted, and grains which were hoarded was taken over. In many places, local leaders told peasants that Gandhiji had declared that no taxes were to be paid and land was to be redistributed among the poor. The name of Mahatma was being taken to sanction all action and aspirations. Tribal peasants interpreted the message of Mahatma Gandhi and the idea of Swaraj in their own way. Take down a question for this topic. How did the tribal of Andhra Pradesh interpret Swaraj? What was the difference between the beliefs and practice of their leader Alluri Sitaram Raju? In the Gudem hills of Andhra Pradesh, a militant guerrilla movement spread in the early 1920s, which was not approved by the Congress. The colonial government had closed large forest areas, preventing people from entering the forest to graze their cattle or to collect fuel wood and fruits. This enraged the hill people. The livelihoods of the tribal were affected and they felt that the traditional rights were denied. When the government began forcing them to contribute beggar for road building, the hill people revolted. Alluri Sitaram Raju came forward to help out the tribals. He claimed that he had a variety of special powers. He could make correct astrological predictions and heal people. And he could survive even bullet shots. The rebels proclaimed Raju was an incarnation of God. He talked of the greatness of Mahatma Gandhi and said he was inspired by the non-cooperation movement and persuaded people to wear khadi and give up drinking. But at the same time, he asserted that India could be liberated only by the use of force, not non-violence. The Gudem rebels attacked police stations, attempted to kill British officials and carried on guerrilla warfare for achieving Swaraj. Raju was captured and executed in 1924 and over time became a hero of the tribals. Let us begin our next subtopic, that is Swaraj in the plantations. In this topic, we will talk about the notion of Swaraj for plantation workers in Assam. As usual, we will start with a question. What was the notion of Swaraj for the plantation workers of Assam? Workers too had their own understanding of Mahatma Gandhi and the notion of Swaraj. Plantation workers in Assam wanted the right to move freely in and out from the confinement in a limited space where they were enclosed. It meant retaining a link with the village from which they had come. Under the Inland Immigration Act of 1859, plantation workers were not permitted to leave the tea gardens without permission, and in fact, they were rarely given such permissions. Yet, when the tribals chanted Gandhiji's name and raised slogans demanding Swatantra Bharat, they all connect emotionally with the agitation. Another question that arises here is, how did the plantation workers from Assam reacted when they heard of the non-cooperation movement? Thousands of workers disobeyed the British authorities by leaving the plantation and headed home. They believed that Gandhi Raj was coming and everyone would be given land in their own villages. But they never reached their destination. They were stranded on the way because of railway and steamer strikes. They were caught by the police and brutally beaten up. The aim of these movements was not defined by the Congress program, so people interpreted the term Swaraj in their own ways, imagining all suffering and all troubles could be over or would be over one day. Towards civil disobedience is the next subtopic. Let us discuss the topic with the help of few questions. In February 1922, Mahatma Gandhi decided to withdraw the non-cooperation movement because the movement was turning violent in many places and Satyagrahis needed to be properly trained before they would be ready for mass struggles. So the question is, what was the development that took place within the Congress after the withdrawal of non-cooperation movement? Within the Congress, some leaders were tired of mass struggles and wanted to participate in elections to the provincial councils that had been set up by the Government of India Act of 1919. They felt that it was important to oppose British policies within the councils. Chittaranjan Das and Motilal Nehru formed the Swaraj Party within the Congress in 1922 so that they could contest council politics. But young leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose wanted for more radical mass agitation and for full independence. During this period, worldwide economic depression took place. Let us see its effects on India towards later 1920. You all can relate this incident with a question. Explain the effects of worldwide economic depression on India towards later 1920s. The first effect of the worldwide economic depression was a fall in agricultural prices from 1926 and collapse after 1930. The demand for agriculture goods fell and export declined. Peasants found it difficult to sell their harvest and pay their revenue. By 1930, the countryside was in a turmoil. During this period, the new Tory government in Britain formed a statutory commission under Sir John Simon. Once again, a question arises here. When did the Simon Commission arrive in India and why? Why did the Indians boycotted the commission? The commission was set up to look into the functioning of constitutional system in India and suggested changes. But there was a problem, and that is the commission did not have a single Indian member. Instead, they were all British. So when the Simon Commission arrived in India in 1928, it was greeted with a slogan, "Go back, Simon." All parties, included the Congress and the Muslim League, participated in the demonstrations. After which, the Britishers did not sit quietly. So what was the reaction of the Britishers to the boycott of the commission? In order to suppress the boycott movement, the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, announced a vague offer of dominion status for India in an unspecified future in October 1929, and a Roundtable Conference to discuss a future constitution. The Roundtable Conference was called a historical session, but why? A Roundtable Conference did not satisfy the Congress leaders. The radicals within the Congress, led by Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose, became more assertive. The liberals and the moderates lost their influence. In December 1929, under the presidency of Jawaharlal Nehru, the Lahore Congress formalized the demand of Purna Swaraj or full independence for India. It was declared that 26 January 1930 would be celebrated as the Independence Day, when people were to take pledge to struggle for complete independence. But the celebration attracted very little attention, so Mahatma Gandhi had to find a way to relate this abstract idea of freedom to more concrete issues of everyday life. Let us discuss why the Salt March was an active symbol of colonialism. In Gandhiji's letter to Viceroy on January 1930, he stated the two types of demands. First, demands of general interest. Secondly, specific demands of different classes from industrialists to peasants. In doing so, his main idea was to link all classes of the Indian society with the national movement. The most exciting demand was to establish the salt tax because it was consumed by both rich and poor. The tax on salt and the government monopoly was seen as an oppressive act of the government. As the British government did not accept his demand by the specific date, that is 11th March 1931, he launched his Civil Disobedience movement with his famous Dandi March. He started his march with 78 trusted volunteers. Over 240 miles from Sabarmati Ashram to Dandi, thousands of people came daily to hear Mahatma Gandhi, who told them the meaning of Swaraj and argued them peacefully defy the British. On 6th April 1931, he reached Dandi and manufactured salt by boiling the seawater. This marked the beginning of Civil Disobedience movement. What action did the British government take after the famous Dandi March? Worried by the developments, the colonial government began arresting the Congress leaders one by one. This led to violent clashes in many places. Abdul Ghaffar Khan was arrested in Peshawar in 1930. The angry crowds demonstrated in the streets of Peshawar. Many were killed in the police firing. A month later, Mahatma Gandhi himself was arrested. After his arrest in Sholapur, industrial workers attacked police posts, municipal buildings, law courts and railway stations. A frightened government responded with a policy of brutal suppression. Peaceful Satyagrahis were attacked, women and children were beaten, and about 1 lakh people were arrested. At such a junction, Mahatma Gandhi decided to all of these movements to avoid bloodshed. Here we came across the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. Let's see what was Gandhi-Irwin Pact. It was a political agreement signed by Mahatma Gandhi and the Viceroy of India, Lord Irwin, on 5th March 1931. The silent features of these acts were discontinuation of the civil disobedience movement by the Indian National Congress, participation by the Indian National Congress in the Second Roundtable Conference, withdrawal of all ordinances issued by the British government imposing curbs on the activities of the Indian National Congress, withdrawal of all prosecutions relating to several types of offences except those involving violence, release of prisoner arrested for participating in the civil disobedience movement, removal of the tax on salt, which allowed the Indians to produce, trade and sell salt legally and for their own private use. So from this we came to know that Gandhi-Irwin Pact is nothing but only a demand which was given by Gandhiji in front of the Viceroy. Now let us differentiate between the civil disobedience movement and the non-cooperation movement. So in this part you will be reading the main differences. The non-cooperation movement was launched between 1920 to 22, while the civil disobedience movement continued between 1930 to 34. So you can see there was a difference of year. Okay. Now the non-cooperation movement was launched against the Jallianwala Bagh tragedy, whereas the civil disobedience movement was launched against the arrival of Simon Commission. The non-cooperation movement was started with the aim to attain Swaraj, and the civil disobedience was started to attain complete independence or Purna Swaraj. During the non-cooperation movement, people understood the meaning of Swaraj differently. The civil disobedience movement was quite wide in its scale, and it was full-fledged mass movement. Non-cooperation movement was withdrawn by Gandhiji after the incident of Chauri Chaura, Uttar Pradesh. The civil disobedience movement died out itself in 1934. Non-cooperation movement got over only after Chauri Chaura incident. Chauri Chaura incident, in brief I'll say, it was an incident where a police station was being attacked by the people of Uttar Pradesh. Means the people of this area, Chauri Chaura, Gorakhpur district, they said. Here 22 policemen were inside the police station. They just burnt it, locked the police station from outside, and they just burnt it. So looking at this violence, Mahatma Gandhi thought that his people are not ready, so he called a movement.